Life can get really stagnant sometimes. And every once in a while, you might feel like you're in a rut. Maybe you need to move cities or even states in order to find a life that's more suitable to your needs. And if you like big cities and you're thinking about moving to a big city, you may be considering Chicago. After all, it's the third biggest city in America after New York and Los Angeles. But is Chicago really worth moving to? In this video, I'm going to give you 15 reasons why you might want to avoid moving to Chicago. And the first reason is Chicago is a town of the past. Chicago used to be known as the first place to do a lot of things. Like for instance, having the tallest buildings in the country. But recently, Chicago isn't necessarily growing. It's not growing and developing as quickly as it once was. The problem is pretty easy to explain. Chicago isn't necessarily competitive, and it seems to be getting more and more dangerous. In the last few years, it just seems really stagnant compared to what it once was. And a city that once was isn't necessarily a great place to live. Let's move on to reason number 14. The airport is terrible. Chicago is a big city, which makes it a really busy place, and the airport is centered in the middle of all that busyness. There's just a gigantic, huge mess of runways and terminals, and it's really hard to get in and out of quickly. And of course, getting to the airport is always a nightmare because the traffic is always terrible. Let's move right on to number 13. The winters are absolutely terrible. For about 5 or 6 months out of the year, the temperature can get below freezing. And it snows quite a bit in Chicago. For a lot of people, just the cold weather would be bad enough, but it actually makes the roads and the traffic a lot worse. Okay, number 12 on our list can be a good or a bad thing. If you've ever been to Chicago, you know that the food there is amazing. The food is so good that you'll spend a ton of money on it because you just won't be able to stop eating it. There are countless deep dish places, lots of fine Italian restaurants, and plenty of other food options. So if you're not careful, you'll end up spending half your paycheck and gain some weight in the process. Alright, number 11. The rush and rudeness of a big city can be off-putting to a lot of people. A lot of people say that Midwest cities are really friendly, but that's not always true. There's definitely a certain level of rudeness and intolerance in a big city like Chicago. And because there's just so many people and so many interactions on a daily basis, nobody will probably remember your name, and you might not even get to know your neighbor. And they might not even want to know you. Speaking of rude people, there are a lot of rude drivers in Chicago, which brings us to number 10. The traffic is terrible. Because the traffic is so bad in Chicago, most people in Chicago spend most of their free time driving instead of having fun. Of course, there is a train in Chicago that takes some of the pressure off the roads, if that's what you decide to do. With so many people and so many cars in Chicago, there are just a lot of traffic accidents, so people there are used to being stuck in traffic. And if you're on a busy street or a busy highway or freeway or something like that, good luck getting over. If you're trying to switch lanes, more than likely, nobody's going to let you in. Let's move on to number 9. The local government is crooked. A lot of local governments in a lot of cities don't really care about the people who live there. But things may be even worse for people who live in Chicago. A decent amount of Chicago's governors have gone to prison for illegal corruption and or fraud. The list of things wrong with local government, like bribery, trying to sell Senate seats, theft, and so on, doesn't make the local government very trustworthy, to say the least. 4 out of the last 10 governors of Illinois have gone to prison, so that should pretty much tell you all you need to know. Let's move on to number 8. Housing is super expensive in Chicago. The average price of a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom home is a little over $300,000. But a lot of people with an average income can't afford that kind of home. Even in the suburbs of Chicago, the housing is still expensive and out of reach for most families. Most of the nice neighborhoods with good homes and good schools are just too expensive for the average person to live in. If you really are planning on moving here, it's important to find out what kind of housing is available and how good the nearby schools are. Let's move on to number 7, neighborhoods that just don't mix. Most of the time, the wealthier parts of Chicago don't think about the poorer parts of the city. And this has been the case for some time now, which is quite honestly kind of sad. The south side of Chicago has earned a bad name, and many people try to stay away from there if they can help it. Let's move on to number 6, college education. College is really expensive, and because of this, a lot of people don't go to college, which is a shame. Of course, a lot of families don't have a lot of money, which limits their options. And not only that, but a lot of families and schools don't properly prepare the kids for their future. This is highly common in poor areas of Chicago, and it doesn't seem to be changing anytime soon. Number 5 on our list is disappearing jobs. Even though the population of Chicago keeps growing, it seems like there are less and less good jobs for people in the middle and lower class. And the unemployment rate in Chicago is higher than the national average. Number 4 on our list is outrageous taxes. The sales tax here is around 11%, which is actually ridiculous. And they also have a state income tax rate of 4.95%. So taxes are kind of a big deal, but not a big a deal as number 3, crime. People know that the south side of Chicago is a pretty dangerous place. The number of deaths is really high, and the safety in schools is not great at all. A lot of school districts have a lot of guards, metal detectors, and other security measures as well. Even a lot of homes and apartments in this area have bars on their doors and windows. Because of the safety issues, it can be really hard to raise a family in Chicago. So if you are planning on moving here, just make sure you find a neighborhood with low crime rates. And number 2 on our list is something we kind of already mentioned, and that's unsafe schools. As the crime rate continues to go up, schools become less and less safe. Of course, schools in nicer, richer areas don't have to worry about this as much. And number 1 on our list is the cost of living is really high. Even though Chicago is not on the top 10 most expensive places to live in the country, it's still pretty expensive. In fact, the average rent for an apartment in Chicago is around $2,200. Well, what do you think? Would you ever give Chicago a chance? And have you ever been to Chicago, and what did you think of it? Let us know in the comments below. Until next video, peace.